So, it's hard to believe it's the middle of March already. So, Shirley and I got back very late last night. So, hopefully, we can keep our eyes open throughout this whole thing. But I tell you, I'm a little tired. But be that as it may, um, I think I mentioned to everybody that we went to a prophecy conference a couple of weeks ago. And Melanie was just kind of curious as to how much it costs. And I just want to say something very interesting, and that is that these guys and many that we've all listened to. Billy Crone was there, and Tom Hughes, and Brandon Holthouse, and if anybody's familiar with uh, some of the others, I can't think right off the top of my head, but there were 18, thank you, 18 different speakers altogether. And the price was very inexpensive. And I can tell you that these guys travel all over the world. They've all written tons of books. Uh, all very approachable, they're all very friendly, and they're not in it for the money whatsoever. In spite of any particular subject they may have talked about, everything from UFOs to the rapture to Israel, the one thing they all just pound their hands on the table over is preaching the gospel. That's the key. And as a coincidence, I happened to listen to and I'd listened to it before. I subscribe to a newsletter that Bill Koenig puts out. John, you read his book Eye to Eye, and I read. We met him down there, by the way, and I said, Bill, I couldn't read it, so we had somebody in the class do it for us. So he's kind of laughing because the thing's like this thick. This, it- I think we've only got like 15 there, so if you could share them, it would be great. Yeah, it was put on by the Prophecy Watchers, which is Armando Gonzalez and is it Mondo Gonzalez and different people like that. But at any rate, it's all about the gospel. Two things that they emphasize big time is telling others about Jesus. And I know I was going to say that I happened to listen to a video that was done probably, I'm going to say 15 years ago. And it was a gal by the name of Claudia Koenig, who happened to be Bill's wife, Bill Koenig's wife. And she passed away probably 3, 4, 5 years ago. And this is a woman. Does anybody know Bob Jacks from Valley? Yeah, Bob absolutely had if anybody I've ever met personally, a gift of evangelism. Yeah. And so this gal, Claudia, was giving a talk, and she's one that she said that she had an experience with the Lord. To make a long story short, she was very close to going into the to a Catholic convent to become a nun. And on her way in, she had some second thoughts, and she asked the Lord to, if it's not what he wants of her, to lead her in a different direction. And she had a pretty remarkable experience with the Lord at that time. And then ultimately, she said the first thing she did was to read the Bible. She sat and she read through the whole thing, and then she did it again. And then the Lord gave her this gift of evangelism, unlike anybody I've ever heard. In fact, I mentioned it to Bill, and he said that he could only recall one time when somebody said no to her. And her point was that she considered herself to be the reaper. Some sow seeds, some reap. And she says she thinks that just about everybody she talked to, somebody had already spoken to, and they just came along at the right time. But she said once she was given this ministry, her whole life, every waking moment, and even when she was asleep, was worrying about people, and they're gonna go to hell if I don't talk to them. And she had just one amazing story after another. She had spoken to a woman on an airplane one time, but she says the first time that she hadn't really had a chance, or she didn't get the chance to give her the invitation to accept Christ. And she talked about salvation, but really didn't get down to the actual accepting or saying the sinner's prayer and so forth. And what happens? But on the way home, that lady's on the plane going back. To make a long story short, she accepted Christ. But she'd be in a grocery store and she just knew she would look at somebody and say, "You want to know Jesus?" And she said little tricks that really make a lot of sense. She says, if you introduce yourself, if you talk about Jesus, talk about Jesus. She said, because it's so easy to get off on to get sidetracked. Like somebody might say to you in response, Jesus, um, they might say, well, I'm a Roman Catholic, or I'm a Catholic, or I'm a this. And her response would be, I don't care what you are. I want to know, do you know Jesus? And just keep bringing them back to that, bringing them back and bringing them back. And but her point was very well taken that these people, that everybody out there that doesn't know Christ, they need to know Christ because they are going to hell. And it's going to happen, I think, sooner than we might think. And along those lines, um, I happen to be looking for a particular uh, painting I wanted to throw up for us to look at. And I couldn't find it, but I came across this. And I just thought this was a good way to start tonight's class because we're gonna go through and again talk about some pretty unsettling things, particularly with some articles. But this is a painting done by the signature here is a Melanie Pike. I don't know who she is, but this is what's going to happen when Jesus comes back. Look at it. Jesus is in the front with a sword, and look at all those horses, all those people behind him. It's armies and armies and armies following with him. That's us. And if I look through here, I can see, there's Rick. Well, right next to him is Annette. There's Maria. I wish Patty was on. She's not because I'd say, Patty, you're right up front. And David and Jack and Linda, there you are, right there. And Bill and Ricky, and there's Bob right there. I mean, that's what it's going to be like. We're all coming back
So how
with
long
him.
do we spend in heaven or mid-heaven before coming back?
Are we actually in heaven?
Yeah,
Coming
we're
from
coming
heaven?
back at the end of the tribulation. We're coming back with him. It's in Revelation 19 that we're there with him, and then we're coming back with him. Needless to say, to get there, to come back with him, we have to get there to be with him. So the question that people want to ask is, when do we get there? And I think the evidence, we're not going to go through it tonight, pretty strongly supports that we get there before the tribulation starts. And that seemed to be not seemed to be, it was absolutely the consensus of the people in Orlando. Although there's very solid Christians out there who see things a little bit differently. But when we get to the rapture, we'll talk about that. But this is the second coming of Jesus Christ. It says that we will be caught up to be with him, and then we're coming back with him. So this is coming back. This is after the 7 year tribulation, and what is probably not very well depicted down below is the Battle of Armageddon, when Jesus will go down and his first order of business is going to be to destroy this massive army that's coming against the Jewish people. It's actually coming against Jesus, coming against the Jewish people. And that's the first thing he's going to do. And then he's going to set up his millennial kingdom. We heard a great teaching, which I'm trying to outline now, by a guy by the name of Larry Oliphant, senior elderly guy, but just a phenomenal PhD, the whole 9 yards. And he did a study on what heaven's going to be like and what the kingdom age is going to be like. And so we'll go through as soon as I finish doing that. And it's so uplifting to hear because we hear all the bad stuff. We see what's going on in the world, but this is what lies ahead. And he even went into, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but you know, the the kingdom, when Jesus comes back and sets up his kingdom on the earth for 1,000 years. After that's over, we go into the eternal state. That's when the new Jerusalem comes down from heaven. And this new Jerusalem, in terms of contemporary measurements, is going to be 1,500 miles long, 1,500 miles wide, and 1,500 miles deep. That's going to be the New Jerusalem. That's the city, and it's going to be different than the first, the second, or the third temple, because there's going to be no temple. There's going to be a temple. There's going to be a temple on earth when Jesus is here, but no temple when we go into the eternal state, because God is light, as we read, and He's going to illuminate this. And so think about 1,500 miles. As Larry pointed out, the what's it, the Earth, the thing that's orbiting now, the
Space station?
space station is 250 miles into space. This is going to be 1,500 miles, six
Wow.
times further. So that's how big it's going to be. And as Larry says, he said, the laws of physics aren't going to apply. And so we're going to be able to move. We're going to be like Jesus during that time. And even during the kingdom age, we're going to be like Jesus. We're going to have these new bodies and be able to move around and do things that aren't even imaginable. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So the picture I was looking for, I didn't find, but I looked at this. I said, this, I think it's kind of uplifting. So with that, um, back here. And what I want to do is to go over a couple of articles, but let's begin with one that I just read today that I found on the internet. I didn't get a chance to have it printed, but I just want to go over it. And this is basically the title of the article was worth quoting, and it's been written by a number of different authors, I think all of whom we've probably, or most of whom we've heard of, including David Jeremiah. And his topic is the rapture. And he goes on to say, the rapture can change our life. It's a source of personal comfort and hope. As we read in Titus, it's our blessed hope. That's what our hope is. Our hope's not going through the tribulation and trying to stay one step ahead of Antichrist for 7 years. Our hope is being caught up to be with him. Paul wrote to the Thessalonians about it to ease their concerns about their departed loved ones. And that's where Paul reminds them that the dead in Christ will rise first. And they're in heaven now. They're in heaven in paradise in some sort of spiritual state, whether it's a spiritual body or whatever. But they're going to be coming back at the rapture, not what we just saw, which is the second coming. But at the rapture, the dead in Christ are coming back with Jesus and their bodies are going to be their bodies, no matter how old they may be or where they are going to be resurrected, and their spirits are going to be connected, and they're going to be the first to be resurrected, and then we who are alive at that time will be caught up to meet Jesus in the air as well. So that's the message that Paul was given to the Thessalonians, because the church of Thessalonica was a relatively young church. He had just talked to them about just started to introduce the whole concept of the end times and what's going to happen, and obviously there was some confusion. But then David Jeremiah goes on to say, death is not final. And I believe, and I think we all believe and have heard this, that at the moment of death, if it's physical death, that we are instantly caught up to be with Jesus. Instantly. And I think that those that don't know Christ are instantly cast into Hades, into that waiting chamber where they're going to be until the great white throne of judgment. Get a good picture of that in the story. It's not a parable, but the story of Lazarus and the rich man, and how the rich man is in this place and begging Abraham to pull him out of there, just give him a drop of water to parch his thirst. And this chasm between the Lazarus, who was a beggar at the time, the rich man was, they were both alive, and now they're in their respective places. And the rich man would just walk by him. And now Lazarus is with Abraham, and the rich man is just in this place that's too far for even Abraham to get to. This chasm so huge it can't be reached. And that's what happens to people that don't know Christ at the moment of death. I mean, just imagine, you know, it's like, and that's why Claudia that I just mentioned was so intent on telling people about Jesus, 'cause that's the only thing that can make the difference between that existence and being in paradise, and then ultimately with Him. The resurrection of believers who have died will reverse the effects of death. And in 1 Corinthians 15, it says, "O death, where is thy sting?" Death is the penalty for sin. And Jesus has overcome sin, and ultimately we're going to be glorified. Right now, we're going through the sanctification process, but we're all ultimately going to be glorified, which means that we're going to have our new glorified bodies and be like Him. All who have lived, all who have lost loved ones, the sting of death can be comforted. This is David Jeremiah speaking, in the knowledge that they will see them again. So, brothers, sisters, friends, parents, relatives that knew Christ that have since passed on, guess what? There's going to be a giant reunion. It's going to be fantastic. I lost my sister 40 years ago, and she knew Christ, and I just can't wait to see her. And then we all have experiences like that. But it's also a source of strength. Jesus promised his disciples on the night he was arrested that he would return for them. It's a promise in John 14 that I have to go away. And if I go away, I will come back to receive you so that where I am, you may be also. And that's the one reference in the gospel really to the rapture. It's no wonder that Paul told the Thessalonians to comfort themselves with the truth concerning the rapture. And that's what he says, comfort one another with these words. And then Mark Hitchcock. We're not currently on a different subject, not currently in a world war, but we can say accurately that our world is at war. And this ties into Jesus's prophecy about the end times when there'll be wars and rumors of wars. And man, that's just happening everywhere. Let's go through a couple of other articles on that too. All the global hotspots and flashpoints that exist today struck me. Article after article about all the places where there are ongoing wars, conflicts, and rumors of wars or threats of war. Think China, Taiwan. And I have an article here about China and how they're preparing for war with the United States. It's going to happen. It's coming. They're in preparations for it.
TikTok is already war against the United States.
Yeah, yeah. But we're talking about pulling out the big guns. Yeah. It's not just in
Attacked by China every day.
Yeah. It's not just in the newspapers. You see it online and all the cable news channels 24/7. The New York Post reported this week, quote, Germany is preparing for Russia to start World War III. Leaked plan reveals Europe is preparing for the Russian President Vladimir Putin to expand his country's war in Ukraine and attack NATO ally countries next year. Again, another leaked classified document. My people perish for lack of knowledge, as we read about in Hosea. We have to know what's going on. And, again, as we said over and over again, uh, that prophecy can be an excellent tool for evangelizing. Because people, you don't have to be a believer to know that things are going on in this world. People are afraid. But we're not afraid, and I think one of the things that came out of the conference, I don't remember who said it, but In the Bible, there are 360 some odd, I don't remember the exact number, that references to fear, not to be afraid. Fear not.
It's 365.
360, that's what I thought. Ah, okay, yes. Yes. You know, I never thought about that, Rick, until just now. No, I won't forget it. There's documents from the German Ministry of Defense revealed, New York Post detailed the potential scenario outlines how this is that leaked document, how Russia could start waging war in the Baltics by July. That's July of 2024. Now, whether or not these things happen, who knows? But uh, you got to think with all the fears and rumors and threats going on, that something's got to happen. Let me remind you, Jesus said, you shall hear of wars and rumors of wars, but uh, follows it with these words: See that ye not be troubled, for all these things must come to pass. And we see them happening, they've got to come to pass. But the end is not yet. Jesus told us this was coming, but he said, "Don't be alarmed," and that's the message of the night that hopefully we can all take away. Tim Moore, Land and Lion Ministries. We often tell people that Israel is about the size of New Jersey. A better reference might be the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, both in size and population. Compared even to Israel, Gaza is tiny, just over 17 square miles. By comparison, Manhattan is almost 23 square miles. That's how small Gaza is. In every nation where Jews and Muslims have immigrated, protests and riots have ensued in recent weeks. And that to me is the biggest sign that we've seen in the last year is this explosion of anti-Semitism. What began as an initial outpouring of support for Israel and solidarity with the Jewish people quickly turned into anti-Semitic outrage. I'm seeing it everywhere. And in places, in people buying these lies. I don't know if anybody listened to Amir today. I think today or yesterday he did an update where he said that, it's being reported that, President Biden's even stated 30,000 Palestinians have been killed. That's data that comes from Hamas, and don't take it seriously. And how many kids? He says, according to Hamas, anyone under 18 is a child. So in those numbers of all the children are fighters, warriors for Hamas. So a lot of propaganda. Even here in America, security experts have warned that terrorist sleeper cells, Palestinian agitators, and radicalized individuals are poised to spark their own intifada, violent uprising. Tom Hughes kind of gave Shirley and I a briefing on what he's heard is going to happen or potentially could happen. And unfortunately, we promised we wouldn't say anything. So, because he doesn't want to be contacted by anybody. So, uh, okay. So he did say on his, I brought it up. I said, Tom, several months ago on your one of your broadcasts, you said that you've got it on good authority that something's going to happen and it's going to involve radiation. So he said that publicly. And he didn't really expand too much beyond that because it's still public, still uh, speculation to a certain extent. But he says he has that on pretty good authority. So I don't mind saying that, you know, because he had already broadcast that on the news. And he also said, I'll just one of the, it's not in this part of the country, in another part. Yeah, not California. I wasn't. Texas. Muslim populations are located. The rage of Hamas has been echoed in the frenzy of its unapologetic supporters and their fellow travelers, even here in America. Oh, we've already read all that. Um, Regardless of the turmoil that lies ahead, we can be certain that the satanic effort to destroy Israel will fail. Now, another thing that Amir was talking about during this update is that uh, Israel is apparently given Hamas or Hezbollah until the 15th of this month to back off. And then today, I think it was either today or yesterday, whenever he did this update, um, Hamas lobbed or Hezbollah lobbed something like 400 rockets into Israel. So there, he's expecting a full-blown war to break out with Hezbollah, and what that could lead to, who knows? We'll have to wait and see on that. I have a just me talking. I still think that somehow, some way, God is going to orchestrate things so that if we can get to that position of peace and safety that has to exist before the Ezekiel 38-39 war can take place. So we'll see.
I listened to it caught me off guard, and I stood there in the kitchen in the morning through 45 minutes listening to the radio broadcast on FBN radio that I listened to out of Cherryville, but it's fbnradio.com. His name was Tom Williams. I tried checking up to find out what this series was because it says in the next tomorrow you'll find out, but then it went right on into the next one. So on the weekend they were running all three of them right it, you know. But he was talking about the Middle East and trying not to get myself mixed up here. And he says that Iran is being backed into a corner. So that's why they're supporting Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis, trying to make Israel have them react and make them look bad in the eyes of the world. Because we're on the cusp of Saudi Arabia signing the Arabic,
Abraham Accords. Yeah.
Or Abraham.
Yeah.
And if they do, he says that's the end of Iran, because there's another set of 6 Arab countries that are ready to do that because they've seen the success of the countries that have already signed it.
Right.
So he said that's why Iran has to destroy Israel before Saudi Arabia takes that step.
Yeah.
And then he went on with another supposition of his own. He said, this is only my supposition. He says, I've looked at it and it looks like it could be like this because, you know, we say we're never going to know who the Antichrist is before the rapture. But he says the Antichrist could already exist. And he says the person who looks the most like the possibility is the head of Saudi Arabia. So as the Arab countries come together, he would be, you know, and they've already signed the accord with Israel. So don't know how that works. And he says, have nothing in scripture exactly, but this, as they describe the Antichrist, this person has everything in possibility because he's all of this plus the almost unlimited resources, money-wise.
Let me just lay out three counter arguments to that. Number one, that would mean that Israel would enter into a covenant that we've been talking about with a Muslim. I don't see that happening. Number two, the Antichrist can't be revealed until the church is gone.
Well, nobody knows that he was that.
Right.
He looks like the seller because
Right.
the person has to exist.
Oh yeah, I agree. Absolutely, he
Well,
exists. I think he's alive and well, no question. And number three, uh, he has to come out of the revived Roman Empire, most likely the western leg of what was the Roman Empire, which would be Europe.
Okay.
So I don't buy the fact, and I don't believe that Saudi Arabia or the Arabian Peninsula, I may be, don't quote me on this, but I don't believe it was part of the Roman Empire. So there's a lot of speculation. You know, it's like you go back a few years ago, somebody or it was believed that Ronald Reagan was going to be the Antichrist. Well, why would you say that? Well, think about it this way. Ronald Wilson Reagan Ronald 6 letters, Wilson 6 letters, Reagan 6 letters. And so they speculate of all people, Ronald Reagan. And then
Let's put the face up instead of this. They can't read that anyway. No one can read that.
what?
No one can read
I'm not
that.
even speaking.
Huh?
What? Oh,
No one here can read that.
Okay.
Even the people on online.
okay.
All they see is red.
Yeah, I can't see it.
Okay. I don't know what to do about it.
Go back to your face.
Huh?
Go back to your face.
You're reading it to us.
Okay. Well,
Are you reading it from there yourself?
yeah.
Oh, okay, then I
Yeah,
guess
yeah.
that's fine.
So, goes on to say, unlike past wars, okay. And then after, and having regathered them, he promised, I will also plant them on their own land, and they will not again be rooted out from the land I gave them. That's from Amos chapter 9 and 15. And I'll finish with that and then go back to something else. Okay, a couple of articles I came across. And we'll just finish up with our look at a couple of more points on the on Daniel chapter 9, and then I want to go through and begin kind of a look at where's the United States in prophecy, and we'll start that tonight, hopefully, just by going through some scriptures, let the Bible kind of speak for itself, and I think we'll see as we go through that what we mean by that. But here's an article. Um, one of the things, and I've read a bunch of books lately by different people on the New World Order, the coming world government, the one world system that will ultimately be under the leadership of the Antichrist. And one of the things that is a weapon, if you will, for the globalists is climate change. I believe that I believe that COVID was a test. I believe that it was planned. I believe it was intentional. I believe it was in part designed to see how many people would be willing, and I hate to say it, but to line up for the vaccine. And 70% of the population, at least in the United States and throughout the world, probably even greater, got the vaccine. So that convinced that the globalists, fits the globalists, of which we're including people like Bill Gates and George Soros and the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, all these groups. I think the current administration and many others orchestrated a lot of this. You think about the vaccine. It's not a vaccine because the vaccine prevents disease. This did not prevent anything. In fact, I think it's been pretty well proven that people that get the vaccine are as likely as anybody to get it again. We've seen that over and over and over again. Of course, the argument is, well, it would have been a lot worse. Where's the evidence to support that? And then we get into, all of the other issues regarding the effects of it. But at any rate, the next big thing on their agenda is climate change. And the effects of climate change are and will be very damaging to the economies of the world. We're already seeing it. We're seeing it in the United States where, we're no longer able to drill like we once could. That's granted, we're still drilling for oil and gas and so forth, but you have forces in this country doing everything they can to reduce our ability to do things like that in the name of climate change. And here is an article, and of course, this is a problem throughout the world. We had the truckers that mobilized or attempt to mobilize against the vaccine mandate in Canada. And oh, by the way, what did they do in Canada? They cut off their bank accounts. You talk about a tyrannical approach and virtually forced these people that were just saying, look we can't comply with this. It's gonna cause everything to spike and shortages and so forth. And in the Netherlands has decided to take out 30% of the farmland and just set it aside because farming creates all kinds of environmental climate change problems. And farmers over there approach us in Netherlands is like the most fertile area in the world for agriculture. And so,
Can I just say one thing? I think, at least something I've been looking at, since 2000, California was in a drought. California, all out there, Utah and all that. 1 year, they're out. You almost have to wonder if God is giving warning. And maybe some things have improved in California or out west. That he pulled back. Because it's gotta be some sort of a miracle. And just the beginning of last year, they were talking how bad it was. And they were worried they weren't gonna have enough water. And yet they.
yeah, there's,
And
yeah.
that's,
Yeah, the Bible's pretty clear. There's going to be meteorological events that are going to take place. So, yeah, I mean, God's got his hand on every part of it.
every chance.
Yeah. So, here's an article is entitled "A Lesson for America: Green Policies Crushing the German Economy." And that's what they want to happen. Because if they can tear down the economies of the world, tear down the United States, then they can build it back in what they want it to be, a totalitarian, authoritative, socialistic system. Let's remember the term build back better. It came from the World Economic Forum, but just so happened build back better. That was the Biden administration campaign promise, but it came from the World Economic Forum. And so, why do you have to build it back? Well, if we tear it down, then you got to build it back. So that's the plan. Here's an article that says the recent economic slowdown has resulted in widespread political discontent, and the core of the slowdown has been disastrous energy policy. You don't think they know what they're doing? There is call it a Luciferian conspiracy, if you will, with Lucifer, just the devil, orchestrating and able to manipulate, particularly people at the elite levels, to do what he wants them to do. And uh, it's just the whole thing is just it's just amazing. Instead of the government focusing on making energy affordable, it has continued its commitment to the energy transition, a government policy project aimed at radically shifting from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources such as solar and wind. We know that's never going to be able to completely solve the problem. Maybe we can get to the point where solar and wind could be represent 25% of our energy needs, but you're not going to use solar and wind power for jets and everything else. To say nothing of the fact that the grid can't handle, widespread usage of electric vehicles.
When I just heard today or read that the grid can't sustain the solar that people are putting on their roofs. In California, they're starting to say that, you've got to turn it off because they're getting too much from, energy from the solar and there's no place to store it.
Right.
So they're saying to the individuals that were getting, net metering, well, now they're saying you get nothing back.
Right. I saw that.
It's all
Yeah,
ours.
right. Did you happen to
So
see?
you still get your full bill.
Yeah. Did you happen to see this somewhere? I don't know where it was in the Midwest or wherever. It was a huge array of solar panels on the ground.
Yeah,
It was
so
like,
I knew it, 150 miles long or something like that.
I don't know how many acres it was, but every one of those panels was destroyed during a hailstorm.
What happened?
Ruined them. A hailstorm ruined them all. You'd think they'd make them hail resistant, but they didn't.
Yeah, really. Look at the houses that are burning down here with the solar panels, they're going right down to the ground once a fire starts.
Yeah. One of the project's stated goals to increase the use of renewable energy by 80% to 80% by 2030. Keep that 2030 in the back of your minds because that's a key time period. And in the speaking of the United Nations and Project 2030 or whatever they call it, Gutierrez, the UN Secretary General, just gave a speech. It's interesting when you talk about climate change. It was global cooling, then it was global warming, and then it was a climate emergency. Now, according to Gutierrez, and it was also spoken by Joe Biden, we're getting close to environmental health. That's where it's going. And so that's what you have to be aware of is that these globalists are using fear to get people to follow and to ultimately give up their rights. I mean, that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
You know, it's not about energy. It's not about the climate. It's about control. And that's what this whole, if you will, Luciferian conspiracy is all about. Germany's closure of its nuclear plants in April of 2023 has made achieving net zero targets. I want to get down to net zero carbon emissions worldwide by 2045. And now they've come up with this 50 country plan to have it reduced down to a 1.5%, I believe it is, by 2045. And now the ultimate goal has been to get to acceptable levels by 2030, but then net zero by 2045. And now they've even pushed that ahead to 2025 with this 50 for 50, 50 countries also is a test to see if those 50 countries can get down to the lowest levels possible. The economic effect of these decisions is palpable for ordinary people who feel it each month when paying their energy bills. According to the most recent data published by the German Federal Statistical Office, consumers have been paying an average of 46 cents per kilowatt. Now, I think we just got a deal for what, 10.5 cents or something? 11 cents, whatever. But in Germany, it's 46% because of or 46 cents per kilowatt because of the energy policies there, and it's coming this way for electricity. For comparison, the average price for electricity in the United States during December was just under 13 cents per kilowatt hour. Cost disparities can also be seen in the price of gasoline. At the fuel pump, German consumers pay an average price of $7.23 per gallon versus $3.33 in America. These high energy costs are slowing other aspects of the economy, leading to dramatic losses in purchasing power for consumers. Obviously, if you're spending that much money for energy and fuel and gas, that's less that you have available for other expenditures. Threatening to make production unprofitable. Companies are going to go out of business because they're not going to be able to charge enough to stay in business. We're already starting to see that. You know, we read all this stuff about McDonald's and how you can't go to McDonald's for what, less than $30 for a family of three or whatever at McDonald's. And it's putting them in a really bad situation because people aren't going to be able to afford to go there. So you're going to see more and more and more of this. And with things like this energy stuff, which, I mean, you look what's going on in this country and what they're trying to do. You know, if you think about it, just from a logical perspective, it makes no sense. You know, they try to say that CO2, carbon dioxide, is a pollutant. You know, we are not polluting the air. In fact, somebody has done a study and said if we had 5 times more carbon dioxide right now than we currently have, we could have conditions closer to what they were in during the Garden of Eden days. That there was no rain, if you remember, but the carbon dioxide levels had to be very high. And they've done plenty of studies to know that with more carbon dioxide, you know, the production of fruits and vegetables is so much greater.
Yeah.
But yet it's a pollutant.
Because it's food.
Right,
It's
exactly.
food for photosynthesis. It produces oxygen.
The tipping point came in February when the famous family owner dishwasher manufacturer Miley announced that it would cut thousands of jobs. This is in Germany and move production to Poland. I mean, think about California, what's happening there with businesses moving out like gangbusters in New York. It's the same thing everywhere. Luxury car manufacturer Porsche initially planned on building a new car battery manufacturing plant domestically and then switched gears by announcing plans to open the proposed plant in America. Widespread dissatisfaction with Germany's green policies should be a lesson for America. At the heart of the problem is Germany's failure to allow the energy industry to create affordable energy for its citizens. For years, the anti business green energy agenda has decreased carbon emissions but increased the economic crisis. Just one more thing. We talk about central bank digital currencies and digital IDs and this type of thing and people lining up to do things that will ultimately result in the loss of freedom. So much more on that. And then I'll just read any questions on it, comments. Um, one more quick article. This is
Just a small little point, you talking about the cost of electricity, or electric bills. We were paying 10 cents per kilowatt hour for years and years and years, and it's gone up a little bit. But for about the last year and a half, I've been monitoring my bill because we get all these added fees, delivery fees and whatnot. So I've been looking at it really simply. We're taking the total bill and dividing by the total number of kilowatt hours to get the cents per kilowatt. It's not the marginal amount if you get use a few more kilowatt hours. It's the total bill divided by the total kilowatt hours, which includes all of the delivery fees and taxes, those things. Month after month after month after month, it comes up to 27 cents kilowatt hour. It's
So
not
your
10 cents, it's
delivery
not 13
fees
cents, it's not
are
15
equal to
cents.
or more than your generation.
Yeah. That was actually the point. Because if you look at the cents per kilowatt hour, it's very low. It's in between 10 and 15. But the real number is about 27.
And now they want that 38.
you wait, just
Cents
wait.
on it, too.
I mean,
For the people that
I
are
have a
paying the bill.
feeling that if the Lord tarries and we're not raptured out of here, we'll look back at 27 as the good old days.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh,
I just find it interesting because it's
Yeah.
so misleading to look at the
Yeah.
price per kilowatt hour.
Yeah.
Right.
That ain't what you're paying.
Yeah.
Like the outlay of the bill, so they show the added on, it's a separate entity.
Yeah.
Okay, last article, and then we'll get back into our study. And here's an article entitled, and it's not to scare people, we're not to be scared, we're to be prepared. China is actively preparing for war with the United States. At a time when their economy is really struggling, China's economy is in a world of hurt right now. And they don't have people to fill jobs. Their one-child policy has been disastrous. They've got a huge real estate company there that's gone basically belly up, and so at a time when their economy is really struggling, the Chinese are increasing military spending and ramping up preparations for war. But who is China preparing to fight a war with? Needless to say, the answer to the question is obvious. The border dispute between India and China could erupt into something significant, but it's not likely. The only other opponent to the Chinese could be fighting a major war would be the United States. And right now, Chinese shipyards are churning out military vessels at a pace that the U.S. simply cannot match. I think we probably could, but we've chosen not to. Of greater concern is the vast network of tunnels that the Chinese have been constructing. We're being told that this network of tunnels makes the Hamas tunnels under Gaza look like holes scooped by children in a sandpit. The Chinese tunnels stretch for hundreds of miles, and their plans are so closely guarded that Western intelligence agencies have little idea what is down there. Domestic spies that are paid for by the West who have attempted to smuggle out information have been caught and executed. Nobody knows why China has been putting so much effort into these tunnels. Are they anticipating that vast numbers of Chinese will need to shelter underground during an apocalyptic conflict with the United States? In recent years, the Chinese have been feverishly upgrading and expanding their strategic nuclear arsenal. The moment the Chinese invade Taiwan, and that's not a question of if, that's a question of when, they will invade Taiwan, it will mean war with the United States because we have an agreement with Taiwan to protect them. Whether or not we would support that remains to be seen. If that war is limited to conventional weaponry, the Chinese will win a war in Taiwan. And every war game that our leaders have conducted in recent years has shown this. So, in other words, Taiwan cannot win against China. The U.S. could try to threaten China with nukes, but China now possesses enough missiles to wipe out dozens of U.S. cities. The Chinese know that most battles are won before they are ever fought. I mentioned a couple of weeks ago this how the Chinese have been able to infiltrate our um, and do a cyber attack against our internet and basically our electrical system basically bring us down. It's all in place. All they have to do is push a button. Interestingly, as talk of war with China has heated up, the number of Chinese migrants, and what's that all about, are increasing on our southern border. I think 30,000 for the end of 2023 up to the present, 30,000 Chinese nationalists. And people can't just freely leave China. So why and how are they, maybe these are all legitimate escapes. I don't know. In fact, CBS News is reporting the number of Chinese migrants encountered at the border is now 50 times higher than it was 2 years ago. In many cases, groups of military-aged Chinese men, all decked out in similar equipment, have been encountered. Of course, they've been trained to say all the right things, and so the administration is letting them in. Meanwhile, Western nations prepare for all-out war with Russia. So, I mean, it's just you talk about wars and rumors of wars. It's happening right before our eyes. So, just one more set of circumstances that is just unfolding with everything else. Okay. What I'd like to do, if everybody is with me, is to get back to our look at Daniel. Just a couple of more things to go through, and we'll finish. And I think we've gotten down through and we've talked about how the tribulation will start. The tribulation, and I think I went through this last week, will formally begin when Antichrist enters into a covenant with Israel. And the covenant with Israel, and that will start the 7-year tribulation. So, what I wanted to do is just kind of finish this up a little bit and just see where it happens to take us. If we go back to Daniel chapter 9, which is where we started, what we see in verse 27 is where it states in no uncertain terms that he, Antichrist, will confirm a covenant with the many, which is Israel, for 1/7 or a period of 7 years. So that's where we get the idea of a 7-year tribulation. It starts when Antichrist enters into some sort of agreement, peace or treaty or whatever, likely a peace treaty with Israel, where Antichrist, the leader of this 10-member regional world government, will promise to protect Israel. And so Israel will believe that it has entered into a period of peace and tranquility, or peace and safety. They'll look upon Antichrist as their Messiah. And remember, most Jews don't believe, or Jewish people don't believe that Messiah has yet come. But when this guy comes on the scene and promises them that they can build their temple and start the sacrifices again and their offerings, and he will protect them, they're going to jump at the opportunity. And if you think about where Israel and the world is currently headed, with the Israel, particularly what we're seeing with with global anti-Semitism, you can see clearly how Israel is being prepared to enter into something like that, to say, finally, somebody's come on the scene that can truly help us out. And they're being prepared for that now as we speak. In the middle of the 7 or 3.5 years, he will put an end to the sacrifice and offering. So, in other words, at the 3.5 year mark or point of the tribulation, that's why we know it's 7 years, because it's the 3.5 mark, which is also referred to as a times and a half time in other places, or 1260 days, as we'll see in a moment in Revelation. Uh, in the middle of the 7, he will put an end to the sacrifice and the offering. In other words, he will turn against Israel. He will nullify this treaty, which he never really intended to last the full period anyway. And remember that Antichrist, as we read about in Revelation, is going to be under the direct control of Satan himself. And Satan's motivation is to wipe out the Jewish people. And that's what it's going to be about. So, and we're going to see in a moment that at this midpoint, this is when things are going to really heat up for Israel and get really bad. He will put an end to the sacrifice and the offering. And at the temple, and we talked about the temple and everything that's going on there in terms of rebuilding the temple. And we saw those videos last time or the time before, and could see that the preparations are being made for the red heifer, and everything needed for the new temple is in place. They've been able to identify the people or the lineage from Aaron, the high priest, through DNA testing. It's just amazing. And how the book of Zephaniah, for example, also, I don't know if I mentioned this, but prophesies that at the end of the age, the pure language, the Hebrew language, will be restored. And that's taken place. Now, many Israelites speak the original Hebrew language as a result of one fellow, and you can read about him. Can't remember his name. I should know it, but actually, and I believe it was in the I think it was after Israel became a nation, but don't quote me on that. And he just set out to completely restore the original Hebrew language, which had been fractured and uh, changed throughout the centuries, and brought it back to what it was. So that's just one more prophecy that's been fulfilled. Put an end to the sacrifice and the offering. So ultimately, Israel, the people of Israel, at this point, when he turns against them, they're going to realize they've been duped. And it's at that point we get into what Jesus refers to as the Great Tribulation, the second half of the tribulation, when, as we read in the book of Zechariah, chapter 13, 2/3 of the Jewish people will be killed. And they're going to realize that he was not, certainly the Antichrist was not their Messiah after all. And remember, Jesus said he won't return until they, the Jewish people, call out his name or call upon him. And that's what's going to happen at the midpoint of the tribulation. They're going to say, we've been duped by this guy. Must be that we've been wrong for 2,000 years and that Jesus is our Messiah after all. And it's through that last part of the tribulation that there'll be a remnant of Jews that will accept him. They'll call upon the name of Jesus Christ finally, and they'll return.
You have to wonder, right? Because a lot of us will be gone.
Right.
So how, I think that might play some, into, they're gonna realize all these Christians are gone,
But there will be a major revival, unlike anything that's ever been seen, after the tribulation starts. Because remember, we read in Revelation, I think it's 7 or 6 or 7, where multitudes from every tongue and language and nation will accept Christ during the tribulation. So you're going to have the 144,000 Jews that'll be out evangelizing the whole world. You'll have the two witnesses that will be teaching about Christ during the first half of the tribulation. So there'll be a major expansion of the gospel. And so that's what's going to happen. And we also read that after the rapture, don't forget, in Romans chapter 11, it says, after the rapture, the fullness of the Gentiles comes in, then all Israel will be saved, right? So the rapture occurs, and the rapture is not what starts the tribulation. What starts the tribulation is this covenant. I think there could be a point, or there could be a period of time, and I mentioned this before, between the rapture and the start of the tribulation. Very likely, or very possible, could be the time when the Ezekiel 38 prophecy is fulfilled, when the Russia, Iran, Turkey, and those southern nations move against Israel. I believe it almost has to be before the tribulation, because it says in Revelation, or in Ezekiel 38 or 39, that Israel, will burn the weapons for 7 years. Though it doesn't seem likely that they would be burning the weapons into the kingdom age. So that would seem, now, again, we can't be dogmatic on that. There are very good scholars, far better than me, that say most of them are now saying it's just what I just said, after the rapture, before the tribulation. But I think we're certainly seeing, well, we're seeing the stage being set. And we need to update ourselves on Ezekiel 38, because the stage for that is just coming together like gangbusters. This relationship between Russia and Iran, with Russia helping Iran build their nuclear facilities, and Iran providing Russia with drones that they're using in the Ukrainian war. Solid, strong relationship between those two. And Turkey, another key player, beginning to immerse itself in this whole scenario, exactly as Ezekiel said they would, coming together. I mean, never have seen that before until right now, and it's all coming together. We'll catch ourselves up on that. So we see that in the middle of the 7 years, he will turn against them, and at the temple he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. Let's just take a look and see if we can get a better handle on what that's all about. In Matthew 24, and verse 15, Jesus is speaking. This is what we've talked about this many times. This is the Olivet Discourse, where Jesus is responding to questions from his disciples about when the temple would be destroyed. Because remember, at this point in time, the second temple, or what many call Herod's temple, is standing on Temple Mount. But Jesus said that that temple was going to be destroyed to the point where not one stone would be left on another. And that's exactly what happened in AD 70. And I think we've covered that pretty good detail. But in verse 15, here's Jesus. And remember, one of the things we need to remember as well about the tribulation is, in the book of Jeremiah, we read that it is the time of Jacob's trouble. What does that mean? It's the time of Israel's trouble. And in Daniel, Daniel's told that this 70-week prophecy is for his people in his holy city. So it's all about Israel, and read what we see here, including that last 7-year period. It's primarily about Israel. As you go through Revelation, you read about the 144,000 Jews. You read about the two witnesses. You read about the temple, the temple. You read about one Jewish situation after another. How in Zechariah talks about Antichrist attacking the Israelites. We have in Revelation 12, which we'll get to in just a moment, Satan being cast out of heaven at the midpoint of the tribulation, going after Israel with a vengeance. But in verse 15 of Matthew 24, this is Jesus speaking. When you see standing in the holy place, what's the holy place? The holy place is the Holy of Holies, the temple. That's what the holy place is referring to. Now, this couldn't be the second temple because that temple was destroyed some 30 some years after Jesus gave this prophecy. And nothing like this had happened at that point in time. We have a type. Remember last week we talked about a type of the abomination that occurred during the time of the Seleucids, who had replaced Alexander the Great when Antiochus went in and desecrated the temple. But this is saying when you see, so it's still future. It wasn't in the second temple, so it has to be something that takes place in the third temple that Daniel just referred to. So when you see standing in the holy place, the Holy of Holies, the abomination that causes desolation. So go to Revelation, keep your fingers there and go to Revelation 13 real quick. Look in Revelation 13, verses 15. The second beast, this is a reference to, in verse 15 of Revelation 13, is a reference to the false prophet. He's going to be like Antichrist's right-hand guy, a religious leader. We can talk more about that at a later time, but he is going to supplement or basically be a spokesperson for the Antichrist. And it says here, the second beast, the false prophet, was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast. The first beast is the Antichrist. The image is likely some sort of model or statue of him that is going to be placed in the Holy of Holies of the rebuilt temple. That's the abomination of desolation that Jesus is talking about. Anything that desecrates the temple, whether it's a sacrifice to Zeus or a slaughtering of a pig or a placing an image of a man in God's temple, is an abomination. It's a desecration, and that's what's being referred to here. This image of the beast. Now remember, this is right in the first half of the tribulation. He's buddies with Israel, but now he's broken the covenant. And so now he's going to have this image of himself placed in there so that the image could speak and cause all who refused to worship the image to be killed. So what we see here is exactly this is what Jesus is talking about. He says, when you see the abomination referenced or spoken about by Daniel the prophet. Now, go back one chapter to or Revelation chapter 12. We'll just read through a couple of verses in Revelation 12 because this is really, I think, fascinating. And this is the exact timing that we just read about in Revelation 13. A great sign appeared in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. If you go to Genesis chapter 37, this is a dream that Joseph had. And so what is being referenced here is a reference to Israel. So this woman references Israel because Joseph had a dream, only he saw 11 stars because he was the 12th. But here's one that actually identifies the 12 stars. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, which all represent power and authority, and 7 crowns on his head. Its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman, in front of Israel, who was about to give birth, so that it might devour her child the moment he was born. Now, I believe what's being referenced here is this goes back to the time when Jesus was born. And Herod sent out the command because he had heard that Jesus was being referred to as what? The King of the Jews. And he was the king. So he sent out an edict and said, kill all of the young boys 2 years and younger, with the idea that he could eliminate Jesus, which would mean a victory for Satan. And obviously, it's at that point that the Holy Spirit instructed Joseph and to take Mary and to go into Egypt until they gave the time to come back. So that's what had happened. The dragon. So he failed at that. He failed at being able to kill Jesus before he had a chance to go to the cross. And now he knows that that's just yet one more uh, plan that he had that had failed. So he just tries something else. She gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter, which just means righteousness and perfect righteousness throughout the world. So she, Israel, the male child was born, I believe that's Jesus, and that he will ultimately, not now, but in the kingdom age, will rule all the nations of the world. And her child was snatched up to God. That's a represents his ascension. When, remember, he's out there speaking to the apostles, and suddenly goes up and disappears into the clouds. The woman fled into the wilderness. Okay, remember Jesus back here in Matthew 24? He says in verse 15, so when you see standing in the holy place, what we just saw, that image of Antichrist being placed in the Holy of Holies, that's what, and so Jesus is referencing something. This is a prophecy that Jesus is giving, and he gives it because, he's God and he can do it. So when you see standing in the holy place, the rebuilt temple, the Holy of Holies, the abomination that causes desolation, not the one at, in 150 BC during the Greek times, but this is the one yet in the future that still hasn't occurred because it requires a temple. And there is no temple. But yet we see all the progress that's being made. Spoken of through the prophet Daniel. We just read that in Daniel 9:27. Let the reader understand. Let those who are in Judea, Jerusalem, Israel, flee to the mountains. And so when this desolation, this abomination of desolation takes place, Jesus is telling the remnant, or a remnant, convincing a remnant of Jews to get out of Jerusalem. And Jesus goes on and says, let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the housetop go down to take anything out of the house. Back in those days, the Israelites in the ancient days, they had flat roofs, and they would gather on their roof to eat and do other things. But when you hear about, at that time, this abomination where the image is placed into the Holy of Holies, get out of Dodge quick. Let no one in the housetop go down to take anything out of the house. Let no one in the field go back to get their cloak. You're not going to have much time. And we'll see in a moment why. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers, because they have to be able to move pretty darn quickly. Pray that your flight will not take place in winter or the Sabbath. Now, the Sabbath in Israel, everything shuts down.
So
And
what flight are they referring to? Yeah, I have my theories.
what flight?
Yeah.
This, I believe, this is their movement into Petra, into Jordan. I think there's fleeing. I think flight also means to flee.
Yeah, because here in 12:6, the woman fled into the wilderness where she had a place
Yeah.
prepared by God.
Right.
That's the
Right.
thing.
So I think they're synonymous. So we see Jesus is giving this warning. When you see this abomination take place, which we just read about in Rev 13, and then we go back to Revelation 12, she gave birth to a son. Then in Revelation 12:6, the woman, we just identified the woman in verse 1 is Israel. This is yet to happen. fled into the wilderness to a place prepared for her by God. Now, most people believe that's Petra, Jordan, which is a perfect place for it's a city basically built out of a side of a mountain. And there's pictures of it all over the place. Most scholars, I don't think I've ever heard one that said it could possibly be any other place. It's about, I think, 35, 40 miles from Jerusalem. So when they see this abomination take place, get out quick because here's what's going to happen. The woman fled into the wilderness to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days. Divide 1260 by 360, what do you get? 3.5 years. So this is the midpoint of the tribulation when the abomination of desolation takes place. 300 or 3.5 years where God is it's just like he did when they were wandering the wilderness for 40 years. You know, he provided food, he provided water, he provided a cloud by day and protected them during that period of time. That's what Jesus is going to do, not for all of the Israelites, because in in Zechariah chapter 13, 12, 13, 14, we see that it's 1/3 of the Jews that will be able to get there and be protected during that period of time. So God's going to supernaturally protect them for that 3.5 year period. Then war broke out in heaven, and his angels fought against the dragon. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back, but he loses. But he's not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. What's that mean? Well, if you read back in Job and other places, Satan actually has access, and we read elsewhere that he's condemning and accusing the brethren day and night. He has access to the throne of God right now. I believe there's multiple levels to heaven. There's the first heaven, which is basically our atmosphere, and then there's the third heaven, which is where Jesus, I believe, ascended to. It's outside somehow, some way, our universe, which is
The Emerald
billions,
Throne is mid-heaven.
billions, yeah, and then billions and billions and billions of light years away. So, or it could be another dimension, who knows? But at any rate, he's cast out where he's been. This is not yet heaven. He was not strong enough. They lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down. And here they identify that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. And that's what he's doing today. He's leading the world astray. He was hurled to earth and his angels with him. Now, go down to verse 13, and we'll skip over a couple because it's late. When the dragon saw that he had been hurled down, at what point? The 3.5 year mark. What did Jesus say? What did Daniel say about the abomination of desolation? About the breaking of the covenant happens when? The 3.5 year mark. What does Jesus say when you see that happen? Get out of Dodge. Make sure that you can escape. What does it say here? When the dragon saw at what point, the 3.5 year mark, he's cast down, he is hurled to the earth. He pursued the woman who had given birth to the child, male child. The woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle. Now, this is that 1/3, because God always has a remnant of Jews. Likely, this 1/3 will be Jewish believers, or they will become Jewish believers, Christians, so that she might fly to the place prepared for her in the wilderness. Where? Petra, Jordan, where she would be taken care of for what? Remember, it's at the midpoint that Satan's cast out. Now God's going to protect them for a time, times, and a half time. That's 3.5 years. So for that last 3.5 years, he's going to take care of them. Then from the mouth of the serpents spewed water like a river to overtake the woman and sweep her away. So in other words, he knows his time is short. He's been cast out of heaven at the 3.5 year mark. Jesus has already told them to get to this place as quickly as you can, and he's going to go after them, but he's not going to be able to catch all of them. But the earth helped the woman by opening its mouth and swallowing the river that the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. That river's probably an attack of some kind. I don't think it's necessarily he opens his mouth and a big river flows out, but
Why would
metaphorically.
Jesus tell his disciples, pray that your flight not be in winter and that you not be? Like if he's speaking to
Anything that would
church.
slow them down, because it's got to
But you're saying that it's not the church because he was talking to the church.
right.
And so the question goes, is this all referring to Israel or is church?
It's Israel. I believe that Matthew 24 is speaking to the Jews.
Because he was talking to his disciples, which is the church.
Right. No, it's
The disciples are
it's
Jews.
it's a reference
all
to
of them.
Israel
They're
because
all
you see
Galileans.
so many references. The Sabbath is not a church issue. And don't forget the church hadn't been created yet,
Yeah.
right? So I believe that if you read Matthew 24, Luke 21, Mark 13, that's large. And now he does mention the elect for the elect's sake. And I think that that's Jewish and Christian believers there. But the rest of it, if you read it carefully, is a message to Israel because it talks about their temple, talks about the abomination of desolation that Daniel spoke about, which is all about Israel and so forth. That's just what I think is probably the case. The dragon was enraged at the woman. Why is he enraged? Because he knows his time is short. He knows he is about to be cast into the abyss for 1,000 years. And he went off to wage war against the rest of her offspring. So this 1/3 will escape, go to Petra, be protected, but he's going to go after the rest of them, which is where we get into the 2/3 being killed in Zechariah and other places. So it goes off, says, went off to wage war against the rest of her offspring, those who keep God's commands and hold fast to their testimony about Jesus. So there you have it, pretty much in a nutshell. And I'll show you this real quick. Well, we're about done. Here's just and I've got it in the notes here. You can take a look at it. It's a graphic that depicts the 70 weeks. It's got a lot of stuff with it, but you can see that here's the decree to rebuild Jerusalem, Daniel chapter 9. Here's the presentation, or when Jesus enters into Jerusalem on the back of the donkey. Here's the death. Remember, after this, Messiah will be cut off. Then we have this interlude or gap. That's the church age, which we're currently in. 69 weeks have taken place here. Israel or Jerusalem and the temple were destroyed in AD 70. And it says that Antichrist will come from the people, the Romans, who destroyed the city and the temple. And then we've got this big gap. And what we're seeing now is all of the pieces, I believe, being put together for the start of the 70th week of the tribulation, when Antichrist makes the covenant. So somewhere in here, accepting the logic, I think, a literal interpretation of the rapture, somewhere in here the rapture takes place. Because Second Thessalonians makes it very clear. We will not know who the Antichrist is because we have to be taken out first. So, and then here you have the abomination of desolation, Daniel 9:27, Matthew 24, Revelation 11:2. We didn't really look at that. And then at the end, obviously, the second coming of Jesus Christ. So there you have it in a nutshell. And I just think it's so fascinating the way Scripture just comes together. And it starts with Daniel, and then Jesus mentions it. There's more reference to a temple. There's another reference to a temple in 2 Thessalonians 2, and in Revelation 11, we see reference to a temple. So we see all of this coming together. So that's where we are. Questions, comments?
Thought it was relevant. Well, I thought it would be relevant to mention a statistic I saw this week because we all probably heard about the like stampede or whatever at the aid convoy in Gaza, and there was like 128 dead and 750 injured. And that was a UN convoy, correct? 80% of the deaths and injuries were from bullet wounds,
Mm,
not from stampede. So, yeah,
Yeah.
you don't hear that even on Fox,
No,
because Fox is
no.
owned by the same,
right.
but
Well-
that's.
Yeah, we're not getting the whole story, obviously.
Yeah,
We're getting what the what the media wants us to hear.
yeah,
So
but 80% was gunshot.
I believe it. So Rick, can you close this quick?
Father God, thank you again for our time that we can come together, be able to give perspective on what your word says, and be able to look out around us and see what's going on around us within the context of that perspective. Your word says, don't be afraid. The word says, encourage one another. The word says that Jesus is coming soon. And so we take all of those to heart, apply them to our lives, and we use them to motivate us to bring people to Jesus and Jesus to people. Let that be our missions. Lord, go with us now, keep us safe, bring us back together safely next week. We just pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.